If you step outside and stand still for a moment, it may seem like nothing much is happening. A tree sways gently. Grass bends under the weight of a breeze. Somewhere, a leaf falls without ceremony. It feels quiet, peaceful, almost uneventful, but it isn't. All around you, plants are busy talking. Not with words, of course. No whispers, no spoken language, no urgent shouts you can hear with your ears. Their conversations move through the air as invisible chemicals, through the soil as subtle exchanges, and even within their own tissues as rapid electrical signals. It's a world of communication that hums quietly beneath our notice, and once you know it's happening, the silence never quite feels the same again. Let's start with something familiar. That fresh green smell you notice when grass is cut on a warm day. It's often described as clean, comforting, almost nostalgic. People bottle it into candles and perfumes. It smells like summer, like parks, like childhood afternoons. But from the plant's perspective, it's not a pleasant fragrance at all. It's a distress signal. When grass is cut, its cells are damaged. In response, the plant releases a burst of chemicals into the air. These compounds are known as green leaf volatiles, and they spread quickly, carried by the breeze. To us, they smell refreshing. To nearby plants, they are a warning. Something is wrong. Something is eating us. Prepare yourselves. It's a bit like a neighborhood alarm system, except no one is pressing a button. The plants simply release the message, and others receive it. And they do receive it. Nearby plants can detect these airborne chemicals and respond by changing their behavior. Some begin producing bitter compounds to make themselves less tasty. Others ramp up their own internal defenses, preparing for an attack that hasn't reached them yet. They don't wait to be bitten. They get ready. Now, if you're imagining this happening slowly over days, think again. In some cases, these responses begin within minutes. Not instant perhaps, but far from passive. Plants, it turns out, are far more alert than they look. This kind of communication isn't limited to grass. Trees, shrubs, and even small flowering plants all take part in similar exchanges. One of the most well-studied examples involves certain types of trees, like willows and poplars. When caterpillars begin chewing on their leaves, these trees release specific chemical signals into the air. Neighbouring trees detect the signal and respond by increasing the production of defensive chemicals, making their leaves less appealing to the hungry insects. It's as if one tree is saying, "They're here," and the others quietly begin preparing for battle. And sometimes plants take it a step further. Instead of just warning their neighbours, they call for help. Certain plants, when attacked by insects, release chemicals that attract the predators of those insects. For example, a plant being eaten by caterpillars might release a scent that draws in parasitic wasps. The wasps arrive, lay their eggs inside the caterpillars, and reduce the threat. It's an elegant solution. The plant doesn't move. It doesn't fight in any obvious way. It simply sends out the right signal and lets another organism handle the problem. You could call it outsourcing, or if you prefer something a little more dramatic, you might think of it as hiring tiny winged bodyguards. What's particularly fascinating is that these signals can be quite specific. Some plants release different chemical blends depending on the type of insect attacking them. It's not just help needed. It's closer to this specific kind of help is needed. That level of detail suggests something more than a simple reaction. It points to a system that has evolved over millions of years, shaped by constant interactions between plants and the creatures that depend on them. But the air is only part of the story. Beneath your feet, an even more complex conversation is taking place. The soil is not just dirt. It's a dense, living network filled with roots, fungi, bacteria, and countless microscopic organisms. And within this network, plants are connected in ways that are both physical and chemical. One of the key players in this underground world is a type of fungus known as mycorrhiza. These fungi form close relationships with plant roots, extending fine thread-like structures into the soil. In exchange for sugars produced by the plant, the fungi help gather water and nutrients. It's a partnership, but it's also a communication system. These fungal networks can connect multiple plants together, sometimes even linking different species. Through these connections, plants can exchange nutrients, send chemical signals, and influence one another's behavior. Some scientists have even described this system as a kind of wood-wide web. It's not a perfect comparison, but it captures the idea. Information is moving, resources are shared, connections are constantly forming and shifting. In certain situations, a plant under stress can send signals through this network to its neighbours. Those neighbours, in turn, may respond by activating their own defences or adjusting their growth. There's also evidence that larger, older trees can support younger seedlings by sharing nutrients through these fungal connections. It's not quite parenting in the human sense, but it does suggest a level of interaction that goes beyond simple competition. It's less like a battlefield and more like a quiet, ongoing negotiation. Of course, not all plant communication is cooperative. Sometimes it's competitive. Plants can release chemicals into the soil that inhibit the growth of nearby plants. This process, known as allelopathy, allows one plant to reduce competition for resources like light, water, and nutrients. In other words, plants don't just warn and help each other. They also sabotage. Black walnut trees are a classic example. They release a chemical called juglone into the soil, which can be toxic to many other plants. If you've ever tried to grow something near a black walnut and wondered why it struggled, you may have been witnessing a quiet act of botanical rivalry. No shouting, no visible conflict, just chemistry doing its work. Inside the plant itself, communication is happening too. When a leaf is damaged, signals travel to other parts of the plant, triggering defensive responses. These signals can move through the plant's vascular system, and in some cases, they involve electrical changes that resemble, in a very loose way, the signaling seen in animal nervous systems. Of course, plants don't have brains. They don't have nerves in the way animals do. But they do have systems that allow information to move quickly from one part to another. If a single leaf is under attack, the rest of the plant doesn't remain unaware. It gets the message. All of this raises an interesting question. If plants are constantly sending and receiving signals, if they can warn, prepare, respond, and even influence each other, what does the word communicate even mean then? We tend to think of communication as something tied to sound or language, words, voices, conversations. But plants remind us that communication can take many forms. It can be chemical, electrical, or even structural. It doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be understood. And plants, in their own quiet way, understand quite a lot. So the next time you walk past a patch of grass or sit beneath a tree, or notice the faint scent of freshly cut leaves in the air, you might pause for a moment. That smell isn't just a pleasant detail, it's part of a message. A signal sent from one living organism to another. A warning, a response, a small piece of a much larger conversation that has been unfolding for millions of years. You don't need to hear it for it to be there. It's already happening, all around you. Quiet, constant, and surprisingly alive. There's a quiet kind of order to the natural world that's easy to miss if you're not looking for it. The sun rises, the sun sets. Light fades, then returns. Days stretch long in summer and shrink back again in winter. It feels steady, predictable, almost effortless. Plants, rooted in place and unable to move, live entirely within this rhythm. They can't step into the shade when it gets too bright. They can't wander off when winter approaches. And yet, somehow, they manage not just to survive these changes, but to anticipate them. They know what time it is. Not in hours and minutes, of course. No ticking clock, no numbers, no calendar pinned to a wall. But plants have something just as effective, perhaps even more so. They have internal timing systems that allow them to track the passage of day and night, measure the length of seasons, and adjust their behaviour with remarkable precision. If that sounds a bit unlikely, consider this. Some plants open their leaves or flowers in the morning and close them again at night, not in response to the light itself, but in anticipation of it. Even if you place these plants in constant darkness, they continue their daily routine for quite some time, opening and closing on a schedule that closely matches a 24-hour cycle. It's as if they're following a clock you can't see. This internal system is known as a circadian rhythm. It's not unique to plants. Humans have it too. It's what helps you feel sleepy at night and more alert during the day. But in plants, this rhythm governs far more than just rest and activity. It controls when leaves move, when flowers open, when certain genes are activated, and when energy is used or stored. And it runs continuously. Imagine a sunflower. You might picture it turning slowly to follow the sun across the sky, which young sunflowers do. But even beyond that visible movement, there's a deeper timing system at work. The plant adjusts its growth patterns based on the time of day, preparing its tissues for light before sunrise and shifting its processes as evening approaches. It doesn't wait for the sun to appear. It gets ready for it. This ability to anticipate rather than simply react is one of the most fascinating aspects of plant behavior. It suggests that plants are not just passively responding to their environment, but actively predicting it. And prediction, even in a simple biological sense, is a powerful tool. It allows plants to use energy more efficiently. For example, the process of photosynthesis, which converts light into usable energy, is carefully timed. the plant begins preparing the necessary components before daylight arrives, so it can make the most of the available light as soon as it appears. If it waited until the sun was already shining, it would lose valuable time. In the natural world, timing is everything. This internal clock also helps plants manage water use. During the day, tiny openings on the surface of leaves, called stomata, open to allow carbon dioxide to enter for photosynthesis. But this also leads to water loss. By regulating when these openings are active, plants balance their need for carbon dioxide with the risk of drying out. And again, this isn't just a reaction to current conditions, it's guided by the plant's internal sense of time. But keeping track of day and night is only part of the story. Plants also need to know what season it is. Flowering at the wrong time can be disastrous. If a plant blooms too early, it risks frost damage. Too late, and it may miss the window for pollination. Seeds need time to develop and disperse under the right conditions. So how does a plant, without a calendar, know when it's spring? The answer lies in something called photoperiodism, which is a rather technical way of saying that plants measure the length of day and night. More specifically, many plants are sensitive to the length of darkness. As the seasons change, nights become longer or shorter. Plants detect these changes using light-sensitive molecules within their cells. By tracking how long they remain in darkness, they can determine the time of year. It's a bit like counting how long the lights are off, rather than how long they're on. Some plants require long nights to trigger flowering. These are known as short-day plants, even though that name can be a little confusing. Chrysanthemums and poinsettias are classic examples. They bloom when nights reach a certain length, which usually happens in late summer or autumn. Other plants do the opposite. They need short nights to flower. These are called long-day plants, and they typically bloom in late spring or early summer when nights are shorter. Then there are plants that are less picky, flowering regardless of day length, as long as other conditions are right. What's remarkable is how precise this system can be. In some species, even a brief interruption of darkness, such as a flash of light during the night, can disrupt the plant's timing. It's enough to reset the internal measurement as though the plant thinks the night was shorter than it actually was. A small flicker can change everything. Inside the plant, this timing system is controlled by a network of genes and proteins that interact in complex cycles. Certain genes are activated at specific times of day, producing proteins that, in turn, influence the activity of other genes. It's a continuous loop, a biological rhythm that keeps the plant's internal processes in sync with the external world. You might think of it as a kind of molecular clockwork, not made of gears and springs, but of chemistry and timing. And like any good clock, it can be adjusted. Plants are capable of resetting their internal rhythms based on environmental cues, particularly light. If conditions change, the plant gradually shifts its timing to match. This flexibility allows it to stay aligned with the actual day-night cycle, even if something disrupts its usual pattern. For example, if a plant is moved to a different location with a different light schedule, it doesn't remain locked in its old rhythm forever. It adapts. Slowly, quietly, but effectively. There's also an interesting detail that often surprises people. Plants don't all keep time in exactly the same way. Different species have slightly different internal rhythms. Some run a bit longer than 24 hours, others a bit shorter. Under normal conditions, these differences are corrected by daily exposure to light and darkness, which acts as a kind of reset signal. But if you remove those signals, the differences become more noticeable. It's a reminder that even within the plant world, there's variation, individuality, and subtle diversity. Now here's where things get especially intriguing. A plant's sense of time doesn't just affect its own internal processes, it can also influence its interactions with other organisms. Some flowers open at specific times of day to match the activity patterns of their pollinators. A flower that relies on bees might open in the morning when bees are most active. Another that depends on moths may open at night, releasing its scent into the cooler air when its pollinators are on the move. Yes, moths are significant, yet often overlooked, nocturnal pollinators. They play a crucial role in ecosystems by transferring pollen between flowers while feeding on nectar, particularly during the night shift when bees are inactive. Recent research indicates some moth species are just as efficient or even more efficient at pollination than bees. It's not just about the plant, it's about timing the meeting. Even the release of certain chemical signals can follow daily rhythms. A plant under attack might produce defensive compounds at times when its predators are most likely to be active, increasing the effectiveness of its response. Everything is coordinated. Everything is timed. And all of it happens without a clock, without a calendar, without any conscious awareness in the way we understand it. Just a network of internal rhythms, shaped by evolution, tuned to the cycles of the earth. So the next time you notice a flower opening in the morning or closing as evening falls or blooming at a particular time of year, you might see it a little differently. It's not just reacting, it's keeping time. Quietly, precisely, and with a consistency that has been refined over millions of years. No ticking hands, no numbers on a dial. Just a living rhythm in step with the turning of the planet itself. If you've ever spoken to a plant, you're in good company. People have been doing it for centuries. A quiet word while watering a houseplant. A bit of encouragement offered to a struggling tomato vine. Some even go further, playing music to their plants, convinced that a little Mozart or soft jazz might help things along. It's often said with a smile, half serious, half playful. After all, plants can't hear, can they? Well, not in the way we do. They don't have ears, no eardrums, no auditory nerves, no brain to process sound into meaning. If you leaned in and whispered a secret to a fern, it wouldn't understand your words, and it certainly wouldn't repeat them later. So in that sense, no, plants don't hear. But that doesn't mean they're unaware of sound, because sound, at its core, is vibration. And vibration is something plants are very good at detecting. All around us, the world is constantly in motion. Air moves, objects shift, surfaces tremble ever so slightly. When you speak, your voice creates waves in the air. When music plays, those waves become patterns, rising and falling in rhythm. Plants may not interpret these patterns as language or melody, but they can sense the physical movement behind them. They feel the vibrations, and in some cases, they respond. Let's start with a simple example. In controlled experiments, scientists have exposed plants to specific sound frequencies and observed changes in how they grow. Certain vibrations appear to stimulate growth, encouraging roots to extend more quickly or leaves to develop differently. It's not quite as simple as plants love classical music, despite what you might have heard. The effects depend on the frequency, the intensity, and the duration of the sound. Some vibrations seem beneficial, others have little effect, and some can even be harmful if they're too strong. So your plant probably won't thank you for blasting heavy metal at full volume right next to it. But gentle, consistent vibrations can influence how it behaves. Now, here's where things get particularly interesting. Plants don't just respond to random sound. They can react to very specific vibrations, including those made by other living organisms. For example, when caterpillars chew on leaves, they create tiny vibrations as their jaws move through the plant tissue. These vibrations travel through the leaf and into the rest of the plant. To us, it's silent. To the plant, it's a signal. Studies have shown that some plants can detect these chewing vibrations and respond by increasing the production of defensive chemicals. What's remarkable is that this response can occur even before significant physical damage has taken place. It's as if the plant senses the attack in progress. Not by seeing it, not by hearing it in the traditional sense, but by feeling the subtle tremors caused by the insect's movements. And even more intriguing, plants seem able to distinguish between different types of vibrations. The pattern created by a chewing caterpillar is not the same as the vibration caused by wind or harmless environmental noise. The plant doesn't react to everything. It reacts to what matters. That suggests a level of sensitivity that's both precise and selective. Now, let's return to the idea of human voices. If you stand near a plant and speak, your voice produces vibrations in the air. Some of those vibrations may reach the plant, especially if you're close. But compared to the direct physical vibrations of something like chewing or contact, the effect is likely quite subtle. So, does talking to your plant help it grow? The honest answer is probably not in any direct dramatic way. But there's a gentle twist to this. When people talk to their plants, they tend to care for them more attentively. They water them regularly, notice changes, adjust their environment. In that sense, the act of talking may not influence the plant through sound alone, but it does improve the conditions the plant lives in. And plants, as it turns out, respond very well to being looked after. Shocking, I know. Still, the idea that plants can sense vibrations opens up a broader way of thinking about how they experience the world. They don't rely on a single sense, like hearing or sight. Instead, they use a combination of physical and chemical signals to build a picture of their surroundings. Touch, light, gravity, chemicals in the air and soil, and yes, vibration. All of these inputs help the plant decide how to grow, when to defend itself, and how to interact with what's around it. In some cases, vibrations may even guide growth. There is evidence suggesting that roots can grow towards certain sound frequencies, particularly those associated with flowing water. It's still an area of ongoing research, but the idea is fascinating. Imagine a root system quietly extending through the soil, not just reacting to moisture it encounters, but subtly orienting itself toward the faint vibrations of water moving somewhere nearby. No map, no conscious thought, just a sensitivity to the physical world that guides it in the right direction. And then there's the question of music. It's a popular idea, the notion that plants enjoy music. While that might be stretching things a bit, music is, at its core, a structured pattern of vibrations. Different types of music produce different vibrational profiles, so it's not entirely unreasonable to ask whether certain patterns might influence plant growth more than others. Some experiments have suggested that gentle, rhythmic sounds can have a positive effect, while harsh or irregular vibrations may not. But the results are mixed, and it's not something you could rely on as a primary method of plant care. Still, it adds a certain charm to the idea. A quiet room, soft music playing, a plant nearby leaves still, yet subtly aware of the shifting air around it. Not listening exactly, but sensing, and responding in its own way. Inside the plant, these external vibrations can trigger internal changes. Cells may alter their activity, genes may be switched on or off, chemical pathways may shift, leading to changes in growth or defense. It's a reminder that even without ears, plants are far from disconnected from the world of sound. They simply experience it differently. More directly, perhaps, stripped of meaning, but rich in physical detail. So, the next time you find yourself in a quiet space, maybe with a plant nearby, you might notice the subtle sounds around you. The hum of distant traffic, the faint rustle of air, the quiet rhythm of your own voice, if you choose to speak. The plant won't hear your words, but it may feel the world moving. And in that movement, in those gentle vibrations, it finds information, signals, small clues about what's happening around it. No ears required, just a quiet, steady awareness of a world that is never truly still. If someone told you that a plant can count, your first instinct might be to smile politely and assume they're exaggerating. After all, counting feels like something that belongs firmly in the animal world. It brings to mind numbers, memory, maybe even a bit of effort. You picture a brain at work, keeping track of things one by one. Plants don't have brains. They don't sit there thinking 1, 2, 3. And yet, in their own quiet chemical way, they do keep track. They measure, they compare, they make decisions based on quantities, and sometimes those decisions look very much like counting. Let's begin with something simple. A plant, at any given moment, has a limited amount of energy. It gathers this energy through photosynthesis during the day, converting sunlight into sugars that it can store and use later. But night always comes. And when it does, the plant can no longer produce energy from light. It has to rely on what it stored during the day. If it uses that energy too quickly, it risks running out before morning. If it uses it too slowly, it may miss opportunities to grow. So what does it do? It rations. During the night, plants break down their stored starch at a steady, controlled rate, carefully managing their reserves so they last until dawn. Not almost until dawn, not well past it. Right on time. Even more impressive, plants adjust this rate depending on how much starch they have and how long the night is expected to be. If the day was shorter and less energy was stored, they use it more slowly. If the night is longer, they stretch their reserves further. It's as if the plant is performing a simple calculation. How much energy do I have? How long until morning? And how quickly should I use what I've got? No numbers written down, no conscious awareness. Just a biochemical process that behaves very much like division. Scientists have studied this and found that plants can maintain this balance with surprising accuracy. Even when the timing of light and darkness is artificially changed, plants adjust their consumption rate accordingly. They don't panic. They recalculate. Now let's move from time to something a little more tangible. Leaves. If you look at a plant, you might notice how its leaves are arranged along the stem. Not randomly, but in patterns. Some plants grow leaves in pairs, others spiral them around the stem in precise arrangements that maximize exposure to light. This patterning is not just aesthetic, it's efficient. By spacing leaves in specific ways, plants reduce shading, allowing each leaf to receive enough sunlight. To achieve this, the plant must regulate where and when new leaves form, keeping track of spacing and growth. It's a kind of spatial awareness, not in the sense of seeing, but in the sense of measuring distance and position within its own structure. And then there are roots. Beneath the soil, roots spread outward in search of water and nutrients. But they don't grow aimlessly. They respond to gradients, moving toward areas where resources are more abundant. In some cases, roots can even adjust their growth based on how crowded an area is. If there are already many roots present, they may branch differently or slow their expansion. It's not just growth, it's strategic growth. Now, here's where things become even more intriguing. Plants can also keep track of repeated events. Mimosa pudica, commonly known as the sensitive plant, shy plant, or touch-me-not, is a unique plant in the pea family native to South and Central America. It's famous for rapidly folding its leaves inward when touched or exposed to heat or water. This quick defensive movement is called thigmonesty and protects the plant from herbivores by appearing dead or unappetizing. What's even more fascinating is that Mimosa pudica can count and remember. As research shows, it can track repeated environmental stimuli and learn to stop wasting energy closing its leaves when no real danger exists. By distinguishing between safe and harmful events, the plant demonstrates basic cognitive behavior similar to animals, despite lacking a brain. Research and later analysis demonstrated that mimosa can learn to ignore stimuli that are not a real threat, such as repeated water drops. The plant can remember this learned behavior for several weeks, even in changing conditions. Because opening and closing its leaves requires significant energy, the plant stops reacting when it deems the stimulus harmless. While not using neurons, the plant uses rapid electrical signaling and changes in turgor pressure, water content within cells, to process information and initiate movement. This evidence challenges the traditional understanding that only animals can exhibit cognitive behaviors like learning and memory. This isn't counting in the traditional sense, but it does involve tracking repeated occurrences and adjusting behavior based on experience. Another beautiful example is the Venus flytrap. Because some plants don't just count time or energy, some plants count prey. The Venus flytrap sits low to the ground, its leaves shaped like open jaws, lined with delicate hair-like structures. To an insect, it may look like just another surface to land on. Nothing threatening, nothing urgent. But the plant is waiting. Not passively, but attentively. Each trap is lined with tiny trigger hairs. When an insect brushes against one of these hairs, something remarkable happens. The plant registers the touch as an electrical signal, a tiny pulse that travels through its tissues. One touch is not enough. That first contact puts the trap on alert, like a quiet ready signal. But the plant does nothing yet. It waits. If a second touch follows within a short window of time, the trap snaps shut. Fast, sudden, almost startling. But even then, the process isn't complete, because the plant is still counting. Inside the closed trap, the struggling insect continues to move, brushing against the trigger hairs again and again. Each movement sends another signal. A third signal tells the plant to seal the trap more tightly. A fourth begins the internal shift toward digestion, triggering the release of hormones. By the fifth signal, the plant commits fully. It produces digestive enzymes, begins breaking down the prey, and prepares to absorb nutrients. At this point, there's no turning back. Dinner has been confirmed. What's extraordinary here is not just the speed or the movement, but the logic behind it. The plant doesn't immediately invest energy into digestion after the first touch. It waits, gathers information, and responds step by step. If the insect is small and escapes early, the plant avoids wasting valuable resources. If the insect is large and continues to struggle, the plant ramps up its response accordingly. It's a cost-benefit analysis, a quiet calculation of effort versus reward. Scientists studying this behavior have described it as a kind of biological counting system. The plant is not aware in the way we are, but it is clearly tracking repeated events and using that information to guide its actions. 1 signal, 2 signals, 3. Each one matters. Each one changes the outcome. And in a sense, the insect itself becomes part of the process. The more it struggles, the more signals it sends, and the deeper it seals its own fate. Other carnivorous plants show similar forms of sensitivity, though the Venus flytrap is perhaps the most dramatic example. It reminds us that even without muscles in the usual sense, without nerves, without a brain, plants can still produce rapid, coordinated responses based on repeated stimuli. They can track, they can decide, they can act. And then, just as quietly as it all began, the process continues. The plant absorbs nutrients, resets its trap, and waits again. Still, patient, counting once more, without ever knowing that it is. Another example brings us back to numbers more directly. Some plants appear to be able to count the number of times they are exposed to certain conditions before triggering a response. For instance, certain seeds require a specific number of cold exposures before they will germinate. It's a way of ensuring that they only sprout after winter has truly passed, not during a brief warm spell. It's not literally counting 1 cold day, 2 cold days, but the plant accumulates information over time, reaching a threshold that triggers a change. A quiet tally kept in chemistry. Even at the cellular level, plants are constantly measuring concentrations, the amount of a particular hormone, the level of nutrients, the balance of signals from different parts of the plant. These measurements influence growth, development, and response to stress. If one signal is stronger than another, the plant may grow in a certain direction. If a threshold is reached, a new process may begin. It's all about proportion. More or less. Enough or not enough. And in that sense, plants are always calculating. Not with numbers written on paper, but with molecules moving through cells, with reactions that speed up or slow down, with thresholds that are crossed or not. It's a different kind of mathematics. Quiet, continuous, and entirely without awareness. You might think of it as a form of embodied calculation. The plant doesn't separate thinking from doing. The calculation is the process. The decision is the outcome of countless tiny interactions happening all at once. No pause, no deliberation, just flow. There's something almost elegant about it. A plant standing still, rooted in place, yet constantly making decisions based on measurements it performs internally. How much light is available, how much water is in the soil, how crowded the space is, how long the night will last. All of this information is gathered, processed and acted upon. No brain required. And perhaps that's what makes it so fascinating. We tend to associate intelligence with movement, with speed, with visible action. But plants remind us that complexity doesn't always look like activity. Sometimes it looks like stillness. A leaf, unmoving. A stem, reaching upward. A root, quietly extending into the soil. And within that stillness, a constant stream of tiny calculations guiding the plant through its life. So the next time you look at a plant, you might imagine those hidden processes unfolding. Not numbers, exactly, but something close. A steady, silent arithmetic, keeping everything in balance. One moment to the next, one day to the next, always measuring, always adjusting, always in its own way, counting. When you think of a hunter, you probably imagine movement. Something quick, something alert. Eyes watching, muscles ready, a sudden burst of action. The classic image of predator and prey, one chasing, the other fleeing. Plants don't seem to fit that picture. They don't stalk, they don't chase, they don't leap from shadows or sprint across open ground, they just sit there, rooted, still, quiet. And yet, some plants hunt. Not in the dramatic, fast-paced way animals do, but in a slower, more patient way. a way that relies on timing, chemistry, and just the right kind of trap. Let's return briefly to the Venus flytrap. We've already seen how it counts, how it waits for the right number of signals before committing to a meal. But it's worth pausing for a moment to appreciate just how unusual this plant really is. Because that snap, that sudden closing of the trap, is one of the fastest movements in the plant world. No muscles, no bones. Just a rapid change in pressure within the plant cells, causing the leaves to flip from open to closed in a fraction of a second. It's not a chase, it's an ambush. The plant doesn't need to go anywhere. It lets the prey come to it, lured by colour, scent, or the promise of nectar. And when the moment is right, it acts. Other carnivorous plants take a different approach. Consider the pitcher plant. Instead of snapping shut, it builds a trap that looks almost inviting. A deep, curved structure filled with liquid, often sweet-smelling, sometimes brightly coloured. To an insect, it may seem like a source of food, but the edges are slippery. The walls are smooth. And once the insect slips inside, climbing back out becomes nearly impossible. Down below, a pool of digestive fluid waits. It's less dramatic than the snap of a fly trap, but no less effective. A slow trap, a quiet fall, and eventually, a meal. Then there are sundews. At first glance, they look delicate, almost decorative. Their leaves are covered in tiny glistening droplets that catch the light like morning dew. But those droplets are sticky. When an insect lands, it becomes trapped. The more it struggles, the more it sticks. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the plant begins to move. The tentacle-like structures on the leaf bend inward, wrapping around the prey. Not fast, not urgent, but steady. Inevitable. It's a different kind of hunting, one that relies not on speed, but on patience. Now you might be wondering why a plant would go to all this trouble. After all, most plants get what they need from sunlight, water, and nutrients in the soil. Why evolve such elaborate traps? The answer lies in where these plants live. Carnivorous plants are often found in environments where the soil is poor in nutrients, especially nitrogen. In these conditions, simply absorbing nutrients through roots isn't enough. So they found another way. They turned to insects. By capturing and digesting small animals, these plants supplement their diet, gaining access to nutrients that are otherwise scarce in their environment. It's not a replacement for photosynthesis, it's an addition. A clever workaround in places where resources are limited. And, like everything else we've explored so far, it's not random. It's precise, controlled, measured. The plant doesn't waste energy on every passing insect. It builds traps that are efficient, selective, and suited to its environment. Now, hunting is only one side of the story, because even plants that don't eat insects still have to deal with being eaten, and they have developed an impressive range of ways to fight back. Some defenses are physical: thorns, spines, tough leaves, thick bark. These are the plant's first line of protection. They make it harder or less appealing for animals to take a bite. A cactus, for example, is not an easy meal. Its spines discourage most animals from getting too close. Even if something does try, the experience is unlikely to be pleasant. But physical defenses are only part of it. Many plants rely on chemistry. When attacked, they produce compounds that taste bitter, interfere with digestion, or are outright toxic. Some of these chemicals can make an animal feel unwell, discouraging it from eating that plant again in the future. It's a lesson learned the hard way. One bite, and the animal remembers. Other plants take a more immediate approach. When damaged, they release chemicals that make their tissues less digestible or reduce their nutritional value. It's a bit like turning a perfectly good meal into something far less appealing right as it's being eaten. Not exactly polite, but effective. And then there are plants that call for help. When under attack, certain plants release airborne chemicals that attract predators of the insects feeding on them. It's the same idea we touched on earlier, but here it becomes part of a defensive strategy. The plant doesn't fight alone. It brings in reinforcements. Tiny parasitic wasps, for example, may be drawn to a plant that's being eaten by caterpillars. The wasps lay their eggs inside the caterpillars, reducing the population of herbivores. The plant survives, the caterpillar does not. It's a quiet, indirect form of defense, but a powerful one. Some plants even combine multiple strategies. Physical barriers, chemical deterrents, and communication all working together to reduce the risk of being eaten. And just like with the Venus flytrap, there's often a kind of calculation involved. Producing defensive chemicals takes energy. Growing thorns takes resources. Calling in predators is useful, but only if there's a real threat. So plants don't always operate at full defense. They adjust. If the risk is low, they conserve energy. If the risk increases, they respond. More chemicals, stronger signals, greater protection. It's not a constant battle, it's a flexible one. And in that flexibility, you can see the same pattern we've been following throughout this journey. Plants may be still, but they are not passive. They are aware, in their own way, of what's happening around them. They detect threats, assess situations, and respond with strategies that have been refined over millions of years. No running, no chasing, just quiet, effective action. So the next time you look at a plant, whether it's a small house plant or a towering tree, you might see it a little differently. Not just as something that grows, but as something that survives. Something that, when necessary, can hunt, and when needed, can fight back. If you close your eyes and take a slow breath in, you might notice how much of the world arrives through scent. Fresh rain on dry ground, cut grass on a warm day, a cup of coffee still steaming, the faint sweetness of a flower you hadn't even noticed until you leaned a little closer. Smell is subtle but powerful. It tells you what's nearby, what's safe, what might be worth exploring, and sometimes what to avoid. For plants, smell isn't just a pleasant extra, it's essential. Because while plants can't move through the world moves through them, carried in the air as tiny chemical particles. And those particles tell stories. Who's nearby? What's happening? What's coming next? Plants don't have noses. They don't inhale and exhale in the way animals do. But they are constantly surrounded by chemicals, and they are remarkably good at detecting them. In a sense, they smell by reading the chemistry of the air. Let's go back briefly to that familiar scent of freshly cut grass. As we've already discovered, that smell is actually a distress signal, a burst of chemicals released when plant tissue is damaged. Other plants can detect those chemicals, they recognize them, and they respond. That's not so different from how we use smell as a warning. The scent of smoke tells us something may be burning. The smell of spoiled food tells us to stay away. Plants do something similar, just without the conscious experience. They detect, they interpret, they act. Now let's take this a step further. Plants don't just detect general signals like something is damaged. They can distinguish between different chemical signatures, identifying specific types of threats. For example, when a plant is attacked by a particular kind of insect, it releases a specific blend of chemicals into the air. Nearby plants can detect that exact blend and prepare defenses tailored to that insect. It's not just danger, but this kind of danger. It's a level of detail that suggests plants are not simply reacting blindly, they are responding to information. And that information is carried in scent. Plants don't just smell the air, they also taste their environment. This happens mostly through their roots. Beneath the soil, roots are constantly in contact with water, minerals, microorganisms, and chemicals released by other plants. Every inch of soil is a complex mixture of substances, and roots are equipped to detect and respond to these chemical cues. If a particular area of soil is rich in nutrients, roots may grow more densely in that direction. If the soil contains harmful substances, growth may slow or shift away. It's not random exploration, it's guided. You might imagine the roots gently sampling their surroundings, adjusting their path based on what they encounter. More nutrients here, less over there. Better move this way. And just like with scent in the air, plants can detect chemicals released by other organisms in the soil. Some of these signals come from friendly partners, like the fungi that form networks around plant roots. These fungi release compounds that help guide root growth and strengthen the connection between plant and fungus. Other signals come from competitors. Certain plants release chemicals into the soil that affect the growth of neighboring plants. When a plant detects these chemicals, it may alter its own growth pattern, either to avoid competition or to respond in kind. It's a quiet, underground exchange. No sound, no movement you can see, just chemistry shaping behavior. Now, here's something particularly intriguing. Plants can even detect the chemical traces left behind by animals. When insects walk across a leaf, they leave behind tiny chemical markers. Some plants can sense these markers and respond by preparing defenses, even before any actual damage occurs. It's as if the plant notices the footprints before the bite. A subtle clue, a warning sign. And once again, the plant doesn't wait. It prepares. There's also evidence that plants can detect signals from beneficial organisms and adjust their behaviour accordingly. For example, when certain helpful bacteria are present in the soil, plants may alter their root structure to encourage those relationships. More connection, more exchange, more balance. And then, of course, there are flowers. If you've ever stopped to smell a flower, you've already taken part in one of the most intricate chemical conversations in nature. Flowers release scents to attract pollinators. Bees, butterflies, moths, and other creatures rely on these scents to locate food. But these scents are not random. They are carefully tuned to the preferences of specific pollinators. Some flowers release sweet, delicate fragrances during the day, appealing to bees. Others release stronger, more musky scents at night, drawing in moths. Each scent is a signal, a message that says, "Come here." And when the pollinator arrives, the plant benefits. Pollen is transferred, reproduction continues. It's a partnership built on chemistry. But even here, plants remain selective. Some flowers can change their scent after being pollinated, reducing their attractiveness. There's no need to keep advertising once the job is done. It saves energy and directs pollinators to other flowers that still need their help. Efficient, measured, always balancing effort and reward. Inside the plant, all of these chemical signals are processed through networks of receptors and responses. When a particular molecule is detected, it triggers a chain reaction. Genes are activated, hormones are released, growth patterns shift. It's not thought, but it is decision-making, based entirely on chemistry. And perhaps that's the most remarkable part of all this. Plants experience the world through molecules. Where we see, hear, and smell, they detect gradients, concentrations, and changes in chemical presence. Where we might notice a colour or a sound, they notice a compound, a signal, a shift in balance. It's a different kind of awareness, less immediate, perhaps, but incredibly detailed. So the next time you catch a scent in the air, something faint and fleeting, you might consider how much information it carries. Not just for you, but for the plants around you. They are reading that same air, detecting what you cannot, responding in ways you'll never see directly, quietly tasting the world, gently sensing every change, and using nothing more than chemistry to understand the place they call home. If plants had legs, pollination would be simple. A short walk, a quiet meeting, a brief exchange of pollen, and then back to growing. But plants don't move like that. They stay where they are, rooted, in place, sometimes meters apart, sometimes separated by entire fields, forests, or even mountains. And yet, they still need to reproduce. They still need to move pollen from one flower to another. So instead of going to the world, they learned how to bring the world to them. And they do it with remarkable skill. Pollination, when you look closely, is not just a biological process. It's a carefully orchestrated interaction between plant and visitor. A system built on attraction, timing, and in some cases, a little bit of deception. Let's begin with the more straightforward arrangement. Many plants offer a reward. Flowers produce nectar, a sweet, energy-rich liquid that serves as food for animals like bees, butterflies, birds, and even bats. In return, these animals carry pollen from one flower to the next. A bee lands on a flower, drawn by colour and scent. As it reaches for nectar, pollen sticks to its body. When it visits another flower, some of that pollen is transferred. It's a simple exchange. Food for transport. But even in this simplicity, there is precision. Flowers are not designed randomly. Their shapes, colours, and scents are all tuned to attract specific pollinators. Some flowers have patterns that are invisible to the human eye, but clearly visible to bees, guiding them toward the nectar like a landing strip. Others are shaped in such a way that only certain animals can access the reward. Long, tubular flowers, for example, are perfectly suited to hummingbirds or moths with long feeding structures. It's selective. Not every visitor is welcome, only the right one. And that selectivity matters. By attracting the right pollinators, plants increase the chances that their pollen will be delivered to the correct species, rather than wasted on the wrong one. Now, let's shift slightly, because not all plants play fair. Some plants have taken a different approach, one that relies not on reward, but on illusion. Certain orchids are masters of this. Instead of producing nectar, they mimic the appearance and scent of female insects. To a male insect passing by, the resemblance is convincing enough to trigger a very specific behaviour. It approaches. It attempts to mate. And in doing so, it becomes dusted with pollen. When it leaves and repeats the process with another flower, pollination is achieved. No nectar, no reward, just a carefully crafted illusion. It's a bold strategy, and surprisingly effective. The plant saves energy by not producing nectar, while still ensuring that its pollen is carried from one place to another. The insect, meanwhile, is left none the wiser, at least in the moment. Then there are plants that appeal to a different kind of visitor entirely. Some produce the scent of decay. To us, it's unpleasant, strong, heavy, unmistakable, but to certain flies and beetles, it's an invitation. These insects are drawn to the smell because it suggests a place to lay eggs or find food. They arrive expecting something useful, only to find a flower. But while they're there, they pick up pollen, and when they leave, they carry it with them. Again, the plant succeeds. Not by offering something desirable, but by mimicking something irresistible. It's not kindness, it's strategy. Now let's talk about timing, because attraction alone isn't enough. A flower might have the perfect scent, the perfect shape, the perfect design, but if it opens at the wrong time, it may never meet its pollinators. So plants pay close attention to when their visitors are active. Flowers that rely on bees often open in the morning when bees begin their daily search for food. Their colours are bright, their scents fresh, and their nectar ready. Flowers that depend on moths do the opposite. They open in the evening or at night, often pale in colour but rich in scent, releasing fragrances that travel easily through the cooler air. Each plant is, in a sense, keeping an appointment, opening at just the right moment, closing when the opportunity has passed. Even nectar production can follow a schedule. Some flowers increase nectar output during peak pollinator activity, ensuring that visitors are rewarded at the right time and encouraged to return. It's not just attraction, it's coordination. Now, here's something that adds another layer of subtlety. Plants can also adjust their signals once pollination has occurred. Once a flower has been successfully pollinated, continuing to attract visitors becomes unnecessary. In fact, it can be wasteful. So, some plants reduce their scent, change their appearance, or stop producing nectar altogether. It's a quiet shift, a signal that says, job done. And it helps direct pollinators toward other flowers that still need their help. Efficient, controlled, nothing wasted. Of course, not all plants rely on animals at all. Some use the wind. These plants release large amounts of lightweight pollen into the air, relying on chance to carry it to another plant. Grasses and many trees use this method. It's less precise, but effective on a large scale. No scent, no colour, no performance, just abundance. And then there are plants that take an even simpler route. They pollinate themselves. Self-pollination removes the need for external agents entirely. Pollen is transferred within the same flower or between flowers on the same plant. It's reliable, predictable, but it comes with a cost. Without mixing genetic material from different plants, there is less variation, and less variation can mean reduced adaptability over time. So, while self-pollination is useful, especially when pollinators are scarce, many plants prefer cross-pollination when conditions allow. It offers more diversity, more resilience, more potential for change. And here's where things become especially elegant. Some plants don't commit to just one strategy. They remain flexible. If pollinators are abundant, they rely on them. If not, they fall back on self-pollination as a backup. If conditions change, they adjust. It's not rigid, it's responsive. Once again, we see the same quiet intelligence that runs through the plant world. Not thought as we understand it, but adaptation, balance, a constant weighing of effort and outcome. So the next time you see a flower, it may seem simple at first glance. A bit of colour, a soft shape, something decorative. But behind that stillness is a system of remarkable precision. A scent drifting into the air. A signal carried on the wind. A visitor arriving at just the right moment. And a plant, rooted and unmoving, that has learned how to persuade, attract, and occasionally deceive, all without taking a single step. If you place two plants side by side, they may look identical. Same shade of green, same shape of leaves, the same quiet stillness that makes plants seem, at first glance, almost interchangeable. But beneath the surface, something far more subtle is taking place. Because plants, in their own quiet and chemical way, can tell the difference between a stranger and family. There are no names, of course, no memory, no recognition in the way we understand it. A plant does not know its sibling in any conscious sense, and yet it behaves differently. And that difference begins underground. Beneath the soil, roots are constantly moving. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. They branch, extend, and explore, pushing through tiny gaps in the soil in search of water and nutrients. It's easy to imagine roots as passive, simply growing wherever there is space, but they are anything but passive. They are sensing, detecting, and responding to the environment around them at every moment. And part of that environment includes other roots. When the roots of different plants meet, something happens. Chemicals are exchanged, signals are detected. Each plant gathers information about its neighbour. What species is this? How close is it? And perhaps most intriguingly, is it related to me? Experiments have shown that many plants adjust their root growth depending on who is nearby. When surrounded by unrelated plants, roots often grow more aggressively. They spread quickly, occupying as much soil as possible, competing for every available drop of water and trace of nutrients. It's not hostile in any emotional sense, but it is competitive. A quiet race for survival. But when plants grow alongside their siblings, something changes. The same species, the same genetic background. And suddenly, the competition softens. Roots may grow less densely toward one another. They may avoid overlapping too heavily, leaving small pockets of space instead of pushing into every available gap. It's not cooperation in the way we might imagine it, but it is a shift, a subtle restraint. Instead of crowding each other, they adjust, and that adjustment can make a real difference. By reducing competition among relatives, plants may improve the overall success of the group. Resources are shared more evenly. Growth becomes more balanced. And the chances that at least some individuals will survive and reproduce increase. It's not about helping a single plant. It's about the quiet success of many. Now, how does this recognition happen? Once again, the answer lies in chemistry. Roots release a steady stream of compounds into the soil. These include sugars, amino acids, and a wide range of signaling molecules. Together, they create a kind of chemical fingerprint. When another plant's roots encounter these compounds, they can detect subtle differences, enough in some cases to distinguish between a close relative and an unrelated neighbour. It's not a label, not a clear identity, but a pattern that feels familiar or not. And based on that pattern, the plant adjusts its behaviour. Now let's take this one step further, because roots are not just interacting directly. They are also connected in many cases by vast underground networks of fungi. These fungal networks, often called mycorrhizal networks, form connections between plant roots, creating pathways through which nutrients and signals can travel. If you could see it, it might look like a delicate web stretching through the soil, linking plant to plant in ways that are almost impossible to detect from above. Through these networks, plants can exchange more than just resources. They can share information. Signals about stress, signals about damage, signals about changing conditions. And here again, relationships seem to matter. Some studies suggest that plants may preferentially direct resources toward their relatives through these networks. For example, a larger established plant might transfer carbon or nutrients to a nearby seedling that shares its genetic makeup. It's not guaranteed. It's not constant. But the pattern appears often enough to be noticed. A quiet bias, a slight leaning toward those that are, in some small biological sense, the same. Now, above the soil, the story continues. Plants are not only connected through their roots, but also through the air around them. As we've seen, they release chemical signals when under stress, especially when being eaten by insects. Nearby plants detect these signals and respond. But interestingly, some research suggests that plants may respond more strongly to signals from their relatives than from unrelated individuals. The same message, but a different level of urgency, as if the signal carries more weight when it comes from something familiar. Again, not emotion, not concern, but sensitivity. A tuned response to something that closely matches their own chemical identity. And then there's the question of space above ground. When plants grow close together, they compete for light. Leaves spread outward, trying to capture as much sunlight as possible. In crowded conditions, this can lead to shading, where one plant blocks light from another. But in groups of related plants, something interesting can happen. Instead of aggressively overshadowing each other, some plants adjust their growth patterns to reduce this competition. Leaves may angle differently. Growth may be distributed more evenly. It's a small change, but over time it can lead to a more balanced use of light, more efficiency, less waste. Once again, a quiet adjustment based on who is nearby. Now it's important to pause here and keep things grounded. It can be tempting to describe this as kindness or cooperation in a human sense, but plants are not making decisions in that way. They are not choosing to help their siblings out of care or intention. What we're seeing is the result of long-term evolutionary processes, behaviors that, over countless generations, have shaped how plants respond to different conditions. But even without emotion, the outcome is remarkable. Plants can distinguish. They can adjust. They can behave differently depending on whether they are surrounded by strangers or relatives. And they do all of this without movement, without awareness, without anything we would recognize as thought. Just chemistry. Signals drifting through soil and air. Tiny differences being detected and acted upon. So the next time you see a cluster of plants growing close together, you might imagine what's happening beneath the surface. Roots weaving past one another. Signals passing quietly through the soil. Subtle adjustments being made moment by moment. Not random, not identical, but shaped by relationship. A quiet awareness of who is nearby. Not through sight, not through sound, but through chemistry alone. And in that chemistry, a simple distinction that changes everything. Not just another plant, but something a little closer. Something in the quiet language of biology, like family. If you were suddenly buried under fresh snow, something strange would happen. Complete silence, yes, but mainly complete disorientation. Up and down would lose their meaning almost instantly. Light becomes diffuse, sound is muffled, and your usual sense of direction fades into something uncertain. By the way, if that ever happens, it's recommended to use a simple trick. Just spit. Doesn't sound as glamorous, but it'll help you recognize which way gravity pulls it. But plants don't have that option. They don't have mouths, they don't have eyes, they don't have ears. So how do they know which way is up and which way is down? Without those basic cues, even simple movement becomes uncertain. Plants face this challenge from the very beginning of their lives. A seed buried in soil has no access to light at first. No visual reference, no obvious signal pointing the way forward. And yet, when it begins to grow, something remarkable happens. The root goes down. The shoot goes up. Every time. No hesitation, no confusion, even if you turn the seed upside down. Even if you bury it at an angle. Even if you spin it gently before it begins to grow. The result is the same. Roots find their way downward, anchoring the plant and searching for water and nutrients. Shoots push upward, eventually reaching the light. So how does a plant know which way to grow? The answer lies in its ability to sense gravity. This process is known as gravitropism, and it's one of the most fundamental guiding systems in the plant world. Inside certain plant cells, there are tiny, dense structures that act almost like internal weights. These structures, often filled with starch, settle in response to gravity. If the plant's orientation changes, these particles shift position within the cell. And that shift is detected. It's a bit like having a built-in level, quietly indicating which direction is down. Once the plant detects this change, it responds by adjusting growth on different sides of its tissues. Cells on one side may elongate more than those on the other, causing the root or shoot to bend. Slowly, steadily, the plant corrects its direction. Down becomes down again. Up becomes up again. No eyes, no awareness, just physics and biology working together. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. Roots and shoots don't just respond to gravity in the same way. They respond in opposite ways. Roots grow toward gravity. This is called positive gravitropism. Shoots grow away from gravity. This is called negative gravitropism. It's a coordinated system, ensuring that the plant develops in the right orientation. One part anchoring, the other reaching. But gravity is not the only guide. As the shoot emerges from the soil and begins to encounter light, another system comes into play. Light itself becomes a directional signal. This process is known as phototropism, where plants grow toward light sources. If you've ever seen a houseplant leaning toward a window, you've seen this in action. The plant detects the direction of light and adjusts its growth accordingly, bending toward the source. And once again, this is achieved through differential growth. Cells on the shaded side of the plant elongate more, causing the stem to curve toward the light. It's not movement in the usual sense, but it is direction. Now imagine this. A young plant emerging from the soil. At first, it relies on gravity to guide its growth. Down for roots, up for shoots. Then, as it reaches the surface, light takes over as the dominant signal for the shoot. The plant shifts from one guidance system to another, seamlessly, quietly, always adjusting. There's also another layer to this. Plants don't just detect direction, they integrate multiple signals at once. Gravity, light, moisture, and even touch can all influence how a plant grows. Roots, for example, may grow downward due to gravity, but also toward areas of higher moisture. If those signals conflict slightly, the plant balances them. Not perfectly straight down, not purely toward water, but somewhere in between. A compromise. A decision made through growth. Now here's something that might surprise you. Plants can continue to sense gravity even in unusual conditions. Experiments conducted in space, where gravity is greatly reduced, have shown that plants become disoriented without their usual gravitational cues. Roots and shoots may grow in less predictable directions. But even then, plants begin to rely more heavily on other signals, such as light, to guide their growth. They adapt, even when one of their primary reference points is removed. It's another reminder that plant behavior is not rigid, it's flexible, responsive, always adjusting to the conditions at hand. And then there's time, because all of this happens slowly. So slowly that we rarely notice it. A root bending slightly downward, a stem curving gently toward the light. These changes unfold over hours, sometimes days, but they are constant, continuous. A steady correction, moment by moment. So the next time you see a plant growing at an angle, or leaning toward a window, or pushing up through the soil, you might pause for a moment. What looks like simple growth is actually guided, directed by invisible forces. Gravity pulling downward, light drawing upward, moisture calling from below. And the plant, without awareness, without thought, responding to it all. Always finding its way. Always adjusting its path. Always knowing, in the quiet language of cells and signals, which way is down, and which way leads toward the light. Imagine a world where you cannot run, cannot bite, cannot shout for help. You are rooted in place. Every threat must be handled without movement, without muscle, without sound. This is the quiet reality of plants. And yet, despite this stillness, plants are anything but defenseless. In fact, they are among the most inventive survivors on Earth. Let's begin with the obvious. If you've ever brushed against a rose bush and pulled your hand back with a sharp sting, you've already met one of the simplest plant defenses. Mechanical barriers. Thorns, spines, prickles. These are the plant equivalent of "don't touch me." But even here there's nuance. What we casually call a thorn isn't always the same thing. True thorns are modified branches. Spines are modified leaves. Prickles, like those on roses, are extensions of the outer skin. Different origins, same message. Eating me will hurt. And it works. A grazing animal quickly learns that a mouthful of thorns is not worth the trouble. Some plants take this further. Cacti, for example, pack their surfaces with dense clusters of spines, creating a kind of living barbed wire. Others, like hawthorn trees, grow long, rigid thorns that can pierce deeply enough to discourage even large mammals. But physical defenses are only the beginning, because plants are not passive. They respond. Imagine a caterpillar settling onto a leaf and beginning to chew. To us, this seems like a quiet, harmless act, but to the plant, it's an attack, and almost immediately the plant begins to change. Some plants can fold or move their leaves in response to touch. You may have seen this in the sensitive plant, Mimosa pudica. Brush against it, and its leaves fold inward, drooping as if the plant has suddenly wilted. To an insect, this sudden movement can be unsettling. It can dislodge small herbivores or make the plant appear less appealing. Movement in plants is slow compared to animals, but in these moments, it's just fast enough to matter. Other plants respond in ways you cannot see at all. When a leaf is damaged, many plants release volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. These are tiny airborne chemicals that drift into the surrounding air. To us, they might smell faintly green or sharp, but to insects, they carry detailed information. Some of these compounds act like distress signals. They call in reinforcements. For example, when certain plants are eaten by caterpillars, they release a specific blend of VOCs that attract parasitic wasps. These wasps are not interested in the plant itself, they are interested in the caterpillar. They lay their eggs inside it. The larvae then consume the caterpillar from the inside out. It's a brutal solution, but for the plant, it's effective. The enemy is removed, and the plant survives. What's even more fascinating is that these signals don't just travel outward, they travel sideways. Nearby plants can detect these airborne chemicals and prepare themselves in advance. It's a kind of early warning system. A plant that hears its neighbour being eaten can begin producing defensive chemicals before it is attacked. This isn't communication in the way we speak or write, but it is information sharing. A quiet, chemical conversation carried on the breeze. And the conversation doesn't stop above ground. Beneath the soil, plant roots are connected through vast networks of fungi, known as mycorrhizal networks. These networks link different plants together, sometimes even across species. Through them, plants can exchange nutrients, signals, and possibly warnings about threats. It has been called the wood wide web, though the reality is less poetic and more complex. Still, the idea holds. Plants are not isolated individuals. They are part of a connected system, capable of sharing information in ways we are only beginning to understand. Now, let's turn to something more drastic. Sometimes, a plant's best defense is sacrifice. When pathogens like bacteria or fungi invade a plant, they often spread by moving from cell to cell. To stop this, some plants use what is known as a hypersensitive response. When a cell detects infection, it essentially triggers its own death. The infected cells die quickly, creating a barrier of dead tissue that the pathogen cannot easily cross. It's a controlled burn, a deliberate loss to prevent a larger disaster. From a human perspective, it feels extreme. But in the plant world, this kind of self-sacrifice is a common strategy. Survival is not about saving every part, it's about protecting the whole. And then, of course, there is chemistry. If mechanical defenses are the walls and induced responses are the alarms, then chemical defenses are the weapons. Plants produce an astonishing variety of toxic compounds. Alkaloids, glycosides, tannins, terpenes. Each one affects herbivores in different ways. Some disrupt the nervous system, others interfere with digestion. Some simply taste so bitter that animals learn to avoid them after a single bite. Nicotine, for example, is a powerful neurotoxin produced by tobacco plants. Insects that ingest it can become paralyzed and die. Caffeine, found in coffee and tea plants, can also act as a natural pesticide, disrupting the behavior of insects. Even the compounds we associate with flavor can be defensive. The sharp heat of chili peppers comes from capsaicin, which deters mammals from eating the fruit. Interestingly, birds are not affected in the same way, allowing them to spread the seeds without damaging them. It's not random. These chemicals are finely tuned to target specific threats. Some plants take this even further by storing their toxins in inactive forms. When the plant tissue is damaged, enzymes mix with these compounds and activate them. It's like a chemical trap that springs only when needed. One classic example is the mustard plant family. When the cells are broken, they release compounds that produce a sharp, pungent taste. This discourages further feeding and warns other animals to stay away. There is also a cost to all of this. Producing toxins requires energy. Building thorns requires resources. The plants must balance growth, reproduction, and defense. Too much investment in defense can slow growth. Too little can lead to being eaten. So plants constantly adjust. In environments with many herbivores, they may invest heavily in defenses. In safer conditions, they may focus more on growth and reproduction. Some plants even change their level of defense depending on the situation. A young plant might be more vulnerable and therefore more heavily defended. As it matures, its strategy may shift. This flexibility is one of the reasons plants have been so successful. They are not static. They are responsive, adaptive, and, in their own way, strategic. And there's one more layer to consider. Deception. Not all defenses rely on strength or toxicity. Some rely on trickery. Certain plants mimic the appearance of being already damaged or infested. This can discourage insects from laying eggs on them, as many insects prefer fresh, untouched leaves for their offspring. Others produce patterns that resemble insect eggs. A butterfly, seeing what looks like a crowded leaf, may move on to find a better place to lay its eggs. It's a quiet illusion, but it works. So, when you look at a plant, sitting still in a garden or a field, it's easy to think of it as passive, harmless, vulnerable. But beneath that stillness is a constant state of readiness. Every leaf is equipped to detect damage. Every stem may carry physical defenses. Every root may be part of a hidden network of communication. And every cell holds the potential to respond, to adapt, to protect. Plants do not flee. They do not fight in the way animals do, but they endure. And in that endurance, they have evolved an entire world of defenses that operate quietly, efficiently, and often invisibly. The next time you pass by a patch of greenery, you might imagine it differently. Not as a calm, silent space, but as a place where signals drift through the air, where roots whisper underground, where tiny chemical battles are constantly being fought. A place where survival is steady, patient, and surprisingly sophisticated. Now let your mind drift now into a different kind of garden. Not the soft, safe image of flowers swaying in the breeze, but something quieter, older, and a little more dangerous. A place where beauty and threat exist side by side, often indistinguishable at first glance. Because some of the most poisonous plants in the world don't look dangerous at all. They don't growl. They don't flash warning colours like a venomous animal. They simply exist. Calm, ordinary, and, in some cases, deadly. Let's begin near water. In damp meadows, along riverbanks, and in marshy ground across North America grows a plant called water hemlock. At a glance, it's easy to mistake it for something harmless. It has clusters of small white flowers arranged in umbrella-like shapes, similar to wild carrot or Queen Anne's lace. But this resemblance is part of the danger. Water hemlock is widely considered one of the most toxic plants in North America. Its roots contain toxin, a powerful compound that affects the central nervous system. Even a small amount can trigger violent seizures. What makes it especially treacherous is that its roots can smell sweet and taste mild, almost pleasant at first. This has led to accidental poisonings, particularly among people who mistake it for edible plants. Symptoms can begin quickly: nausea, muscle twitching, confusion, then seizures that can escalate rapidly. Without prompt medical care, it can be fatal. It is a plant that does not warn you loudly. It simply waits to be misidentified. Now, let's move to something more familiar in name, if not in experience. Deadly nightshade has a long and dark history. Native to parts of Europe, North Africa, and Western Asia, it carries an almost mythic reputation. Its berries are glossy, black, and surprisingly attractive. They resemble small cherries. Children, especially, have been known to pick them out of curiosity. But these berries contain potent alkaloids, including atropine and scopolamine. These chemicals interfere with the nervous system, disrupting signals between nerves and muscles. The symptoms are distinctive: dilated pupils, blurred vision, a rapid heartbeat, confusion, and hallucinations. In higher doses, paralysis and death can follow. The name belladonna means beautiful woman in Italian. Historically, extracts of the plant were used to dilate the pupils, giving the eyes a wide, luminous appearance that was once considered desirable. It's a striking example of how something toxic can be repurposed, carefully controlled, and even admired. But uncontrolled, it remains dangerous. Next, we step into the forests and fields of North America again, where a plant with a softer presence hides a slower kind of harm. White snake root doesn't look threatening. It produces clusters of small white flowers and grows quietly in shaded areas. Its danger is indirect. White snake root contains a toxin called trematol. When livestock graze on the plant, the toxin accumulates in their bodies. It can then pass into milk and meat. In the early 19th century, this led to a mysterious illness known as milk sickness. People who consumed contaminated milk became ill with weakness, vomiting, and tremors. Many died without ever knowing the cause. One of the most notable victims is believed to be Nancy Hanks Lincoln, the mother of Abraham Lincoln. Here, the plant never needed to be eaten directly. Its poison moved through the food chain, quietly, invisibly. Now, let's turn to a plant that is both beautiful and deeply unsettling in its potential: castor bean plant is widely cultivated and even used ornamentally in gardens. Its leaves are large and star-shaped, often with a deep green or reddish tint. Its seeds, known as castor beans, are striking, with mottled patterns that almost look polished. From these seeds comes castor oil, which has been used for centuries in medicine and industry. But the seeds also contain ricin. Ricin is one of the most potent plant toxins known. It works by interfering with the cell's ability to produce proteins. Without proteins, cells cannot function and they die. Ingesting even a small amount of ricin can lead to severe abdominal pain, vomiting, and organ failure. The severity depends on the dose and how it enters the body, but it is not something the body can easily recover from. Handling intact seeds is generally safe, but crushing or chewing them releases the toxin. It's a plant of contrasts. Useful, even beneficial in controlled forms, yet capable of profound harm. A similar duality appears in another striking plant. Rosary pea produces small, bright red seeds with a distinctive black spot. They are often used in jewellery and prayer beads, admired for their uniform size and vivid colour. But inside these seeds is abrin, a toxin even more potent than ricin. The outer shell of the seed is hard and usually prevents exposure. However, if the seed is damaged, pierced, or chewed, the toxin can be released. There have been cases where people making jewellery accidentally pricked themselves with a needle contaminated by the seed, leading to serious poisoning. It's a reminder that danger doesn't always come from eating something. Sometimes it comes from something as small as a puncture. Now, picture a warm climate, a garden filled with flowering shrubs. Among them, you might find oleander. It's widely grown for its clusters of pink, white, or red flowers. It's hardy, drought-resistant, and commonly used in landscaping. And every part of it is toxic. Oleander contains cardiac glycosides, compounds that affect the heart. Even small amounts can cause nausea, vomiting, and disturbances in heart rhythm. There are stories, some well documented, of people becoming ill after using oleander branches as skewers for cooking or from inhaling smoke when the plant is burned. It doesn't take much. A leaf or two can be enough to cause serious harm. And then there is a plant that many people know intimately, though often in a very different context. Tobacco plant has shaped economies, cultures, and habits around the world. Its leaves are processed and used in various forms, most commonly for smoking. The active compound, nicotine, is a powerful neurotoxin. In small controlled doses, it acts as a stimulant. In larger amounts, it can disrupt the nervous system, leading to nausea, dizziness, and, in extreme cases, respiratory failure. Historically, nicotine-based solutions have been used as insecticides. The same property that affects human nerves is even more potent in insects. It's another example of how a plant's defense mechanism becomes something humans interact with daily, often without fully considering its original purpose. Across all these examples, a pattern begins to emerge. These plants are not trying to harm humans specifically. Their toxins evolved as defenses against herbivores, insects, and pathogens. We simply happen to share enough biological similarities with those targets that the effects carry over. And yet, we continue to live among them, We cultivate some of them. We study them. We extract their compounds and turn them into medicines, tools, and sometimes weapons. There is a quiet tension here. The same chemistry that can stop a predator can also be used to heal. The same plant that can kill can also be part of a carefully measured treatment. It all depends on dose, preparation, and knowledge. Without that knowledge, the line between harmless and harmful can be very thin. So, as you imagine this garden of dangerous plants, try not to picture it as hostile. Instead, think of it as precise. Each plant carries its own set of defenses, shaped by evolution, tuned to its environment. They are not malicious. They are simply effective. And in the stillness of that effectiveness, they remind us of something important. Nature does not need to move quickly to be powerful. Sometimes it just needs to be patient. We've seen how plants defend themselves, and we've met some of the most dangerous among them. But here is where the story turns in a different direction, because humans, as we tend to do, did not simply avoid these plants. We studied them. We experimented, carefully at times, recklessly at others, and over centuries we learned something both useful and unsettling. The same substances that can harm in the right hands and the right amounts can also heal, or beautify, or alter the mind, or change the course of history. So now we step into a quieter, more deliberate world, one where poison is not just a threat, but a tool. Let's begin with beauty. There was a time, particularly during the Renaissance in Europe, when large, dark pupils were considered deeply attractive. Wide eyes suggested youth, softness, and a certain kind of allure. To achieve this, some women turned to extracts from deadly nightshade. A small amount of the plant's extract, placed carefully into the eyes, would cause the pupils to dilate. The effect could be striking. The eyes would appear darker, more luminous, more expressive. But the cost was real. Blurred vision, sensitivity to light, and potential long-term damage to the eyes were common. The line between enhancement and harm was thin and often crossed. Still, the practice persisted, because even then, the idea of beauty carried its own risks. And it wasn't the only time poisonous plants found their way into cosmetics. Various plant extracts have been used throughout history to alter skin tone, create pigments, or produce specific effects. Some contained mild toxins that, in small doses, caused temporary changes. Others were less forgiving. What matters here is not just the outcome, but the mindset. The willingness to take something dangerous and shape it into something desirable. Now, let's move gently into medicine. This is where things become more precise. Many of the compounds we've discussed, or ones very much like them, form the basis of modern pharmaceuticals. The difference lies in control. Dose, purification, and understanding transform a poison into a treatment. Take atropine, one of the key compounds in deadly nightshade. In carefully measured doses, it is used in medicine to dilate pupils during eye exams, to treat certain types of nerve agent exposure, and to manage some heart conditions. The same compound that once blurred vision for beauty now plays a role in saving lives. Or consider the tobacco plant again. Nicotine, while toxic, has been studied for its effects on the nervous system. In controlled environments, it has been explored for its potential cognitive effects, though its addictive nature makes it complex and controversial. And then there's the castor bean plant. While ricin itself is highly toxic, the plant also produces castor oil, which has been used for centuries as a laxative and in various medicinal applications. The toxin and the remedy exist side by side, separated by careful processing. It is a versatile, nutrient-rich oil, high in ricinoleic acid and vitamin E, commonly used to moisturize skin, boost hair growth, and relieve constipation. It offers anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and wound-healing properties and is often applied to reduce acne, joint pain, and skin inflammation. This duality appears again and again. Foxglove, or digitalis, has medicinal uses, but is also very toxic to humans and other mammals. Consumption can cause serious illness or death. The pharmaceutical drug digoxin, derived from the plant, is used to treat congestive heart failure and arrhythmia by slowing the heart rate and increasing blood output. All parts of the plant are poisonous, and yet it's saving lives. It's a pattern that repeats across cultures and across time. Plants that evolved to defend themselves became part of human attempts to heal. But medicine is only one part of the story. There is also ritual. For thousands of years, humans have used plants not just to treat the body, but to alter the mind. Some of these plants contain compounds that can change perception, induce visions, or create altered states of consciousness. In certain traditions, these effects were seen as a way to connect with something beyond the everyday world. Shamans, healers, and spiritual leaders used specific plants in controlled settings, often guided by deep knowledge passed down through generations. The difference between ritual and danger often came down to experience. Knowing how much to use, when to use it, and how to guide someone through the experience. Without that knowledge, the same plants could be overwhelming, even harmful. And then there is another use. Weapons. Plants have long played a role in warfare and assassination, not through brute force, but through subtlety. Extracts from toxic plants have been used to coat arrow tips, turning a simple wound into something far more dangerous. In some regions, hunters and warriors developed sophisticated methods for preparing these poisons, ensuring that even a small injury could incapacitate prey or an enemy. The effectiveness lay in their invisibility. A cut that seemed minor could become deadly hours later. In more calculated settings, plant-based poisons have been used in acts of assassination. Food, drink, and medicine provided opportunities. A tasteless or slow-acting toxin could be administered without immediate suspicion. Symptoms might appear gradually, making it difficult to trace the cause. Throughout history, there are stories, some confirmed, others debated, of rulers, political figures, and rivals who may have been poisoned using plant-derived substances. It is a method that relies not on strength, but on knowledge, on patience, on timing. And that makes it both fascinating and unsettling. Because unlike a weapon you can see, a poison works quietly. It enters the body unnoticed. It begins its work at a cellular level, and by the time its presence is clear, it may already be too late to reverse. Yet even here, the story is not purely dark. The same understanding that allows poisons to be used as weapons also allows them to be detected, treated, and prevented. Modern toxicology, medicine, and forensic science have grown in part from the need to understand these substances. So again, we see that balance. Poison and cure. Beauty and risk. Ritual and danger. All of it tied together by chemistry. And perhaps that's the most important idea to rest with tonight. There is no clear line that separates a poison from a medicine. It is not the substance itself that defines it, but the dose, the context, and the knowledge behind its use. A drop can heal. A little more can harm. Plants did not evolve these compounds for us. They evolved them for survival. But in our curiosity, we've learned to adapt them, to reshape their purpose. Sometimes carefully, sometimes not. So, as you let your thoughts settle, imagine a shelf lined with small glass bottles. Each one contains an extract from a plant. Clear, quiet, unassuming. Inside each bottle is a story, a history of trial and error, of discovery and consequence. Some of those bottles hold remedies, others hold dangers, and some hold both at the same time. By now, we've seen what poisonous plants can do. We've looked at how they defend themselves, how their chemistry works, and how humans have learned to use that chemistry in medicine, beauty, and ritual. But there's another side to this story. At various points in history, people have deliberately used plant poisons to harm, weaken, or eliminate others. Not always openly, and not always in ways that could be easily proven. Poison has a certain advantage. It doesn't require strength. It doesn't draw attention in the moment. It can be mixed into food, drink, or medicine. And in many cases, the symptoms can look like illness rather than intent. That makes it both effective and difficult to trace. Some of the deaths we are about to look at are well documented, with strong evidence behind them. Others are based on historical accounts that leave room for doubt. In a few cases, we simply don't know for certain what happened, but what connects them is this: the quiet use of natural toxins, often derived from plants, and the lasting questions they leave behind. We begin with Socrates. Athens, 399 BCE. The city is tense, recovering from war and political instability. Socrates, already an unusual figure, has been brought to trial. He is accused of corrupting the youth and failing to respect the gods of the city. But beneath those charges lies something deeper. Socrates questioned everything: authority, tradition, certainty itself. And in a fragile society, that kind of questioning can feel dangerous. He is sentenced to death. The method is not immediate violence. Instead, it is structured, almost procedural. He is given a cup of poison, prepared from poison hemlock. We know what follows, largely from Plato's account in the Phaedo. Socrates does not resist. He speaks calmly with his friends. There is no panic, no rush. The moment is strangely composed. When the time comes, he drinks. Hemlock contains quinine, an alkaloid that disrupts the nervous system. It prevents muscles from responding to signals, but it does so gradually. After drinking, Socrates is instructed to walk. Movement, it seems, helps distribute the poison. At first, nothing dramatic happens. Then, slowly, sensation begins to fade. His feet grow heavy. Then numb. The numbness rises, moving upward through his legs. His friends touch him, asking if he can still feel. He cannot. The paralysis continues, methodical and quiet. What makes this account so striking is that his mind appears to remain clear. He speaks until he no longer can. There is no sudden collapse, just a steady progression. Eventually, the numbness reaches his chest. His breathing slows, and then without spectacle, it ends. It is one of the most detailed descriptions we have of a death by plant-derived poison, and it is strangely calm. Now let's move forward and into a very different setting. Early 19th century America. Dense forests, scattered farms, communities still closely tied to the land. Nancy Hanks Lincoln lives in Indiana with her family. Life is difficult but steady. Food comes from what is grown, raised, or gathered nearby. Then something begins to spread. People fall ill. Not all at once, but in clusters. Families, neighbours. The symptoms are unsettling. Weakness that doesn't pass. Persistent vomiting. Tremors that seem to come from deep within the body. There is no clear cause. Some recover, many do not. Nancy Hanks Lincoln becomes one of the victims. She dies in 1818. At the time, no one understands why. It would take years before the connection is made to white snake root. The plant grows quietly in shaded areas. It doesn't stand out. Livestock grazing freely consume it without immediate signs of distress. But the toxin, tremetol, accumulates. It moves into the milk, and from there, into the people who drink it. What makes this case so haunting is its indirectness. No one chose to ingest a poison. No one even knew it was present. It moved silently through the food chain, turning something as ordinary as milk into a source of harm. Now, let's step back into the world of power and politics. Ancient Rome. Here, poison was not just feared, it was expected. Claudius ruled during a time when succession was rarely straightforward. Power shifted through alliances, manipulation, and at times, quiet elimination. Claudius himself had survived long enough to become emperor, in part because he was underestimated. But in 54 CE, he died suddenly. Ancient historians, including Tacitus and Suetonius, suggest that he may have been poisoned. The most common version of the story involves mushrooms. Mushrooms held a special place in Roman cuisine, sometimes referred to as the food of the gods. But they also carried risk. Some species are highly toxic, and distinguishing them is not always easy. According to these accounts, Claudius was served poisoned mushrooms, possibly arranged by his wife Agrippina. Whether this is true is still debated, but the story persists because it fits the pattern of the time. Poison delivered through food in a setting of trust. Quiet, effective, difficult to prove. A similar uncertainty surrounds Augustus. He died decades earlier, in 14 CE after a long reign that brought relative stability to Rome. Officially, his death was natural. But later accounts introduced doubt. Some suggest that his wife, Livia, may have used poisoned figs to hasten his death. The idea is subtle. Not a dramatic act, but a small intervention at the end of a life already nearing its close. Again, there is no definitive evidence, but the fact that such stories emerged at all tells us something about how people understood power at the time. Poison was part of the landscape. Now, we move into a case where the evidence is far more concrete. London, 1978. Georgy Markov is living in exile. He has been critical of the Bulgarian government, and his work has made him a target. One day, while crossing Waterloo Bridge, he feels something unusual. A sharp sting in his thigh. He turns, but nothing stands out. Just a man nearby with an umbrella. It seems insignificant. But later that day, he develops a fever. Over the next few days, his condition worsens. The symptoms are severe, but not immediately identifiable. He is admitted to the hospital. Doctors struggle to understand what is happening. Then, he dies. An autopsy reveals something extraordinary. A tiny metal pellet embedded in his leg, barely visible. Inside it, traces of ricin derived from the castor bean plant. The pellet had been engineered to release the toxin slowly. The umbrella was not ordinary. It had been modified to deliver the pellet with compressed gas. This was precision. A plant toxin extracted, refined, and turned into a highly targeted weapon. It's one of the clearest examples of how plant chemistry can move from natural defense into deliberate human design. Now let's return to uncertainty. Charles VI died in 1740 after consuming mushrooms. This much is generally agreed upon. What remains unclear is whether the mushrooms were mistakenly identified or intentionally chosen. Some species, like the death cab, contain toxins that damage the liver. The symptoms can be delayed, which makes the connection harder to recognize in time. A person may feel fine at first, then become ill hours later. By the time the severity is clear, the damage is already significant. Whether this was an accident or something more deliberate is unknown, but it reflects a recurring theme. Nature does not label its dangers clearly. Now we step into a quieter, more modern story. Chris McCandless. In 1992, he travelled into the Alaskan wilderness, seeking solitude and self-reliance. He lived in an abandoned bus, surviving on what he could gather and hunt. For a time, he managed. Then something changed. His journal entries become shorter, more urgent. He writes about weakness, about difficulty moving, about hunger. For years, it was assumed that he simply starved, but later research introduced another possibility. He had been eating seeds from wild plants. Some of these seeds may have contained toxic compounds, possibly affecting his ability to metabolize food properly. One theory suggests a compound that interferes with digestion, making it difficult for the body to extract nutrients even when food is available. The exact cause remains debated, but it highlights something important. Even with modern knowledge, even with intention and care, the natural world can still be misread. And finally, we return to two figures whose deaths remain surrounded by speculation. Hannibal Barca. After years of conflict with Rome, he found himself with fewer and fewer options. According to historical accounts, he carried poison with him, prepared in advance. When capture became inevitable, he chose to use it. The details are sparse, the exact substance unknown, but the intent is clear. A controlled ending rather than an uncertain fate. And then, Alexander the Great. His death in 323 BCE is one of history's enduring mysteries. He fell ill after a banquet. Over the course of days, his condition worsened. Fever, weakness, loss of speech. Some accounts describe a slow decline. Others suggest something more sudden. Theories range widely. Malaria, typhoid fever, autoimmune conditions, and of course, poison. Some have suggested plant-derived toxins that could produce a gradual onset of symptoms matching certain historical descriptions. But there is no consensus, only possibilities. And perhaps that is where we gently end, not with certainty, but with quiet reflection. Because poison, especially from plants, rarely announces itself clearly in history. It leaves traces, symptoms, stories, but often not answers. A cup lifted, a meal shared, a walk across a bridge. Small, ordinary actions, and within them the presence of something unseen, something natural, something powerful. Plants rooted and silent, shaping events in ways that are often only understood much later, or sometimes not at all. And in that uncertainty, there is a kind of calm, a reminder that not everything is meant to be fully known. Some things simply are. Quiet, subtle, and lasting.